David is here, head of PE at Leeds Beckett University. David worked on a number of national and global projects related to improving children's movement, fitness, physical activities, a lot of the things we're talking, and Dave's going to share a variety of those projects with us now. So thank you, Dave.
Yeah, and thanks Kev, thanks Theon for organising the conference. I think for everyone I've spoken to, I think it's an excellent opportunity to network and a bit of learning around the edges. And I think I was talking to Lorcan and saying, you might think, yep, we're doing it right, or maybe just tinker with some of that, and we need to do a bit more of that. So you kind of almost triaging your context alongside the policies you might be looking at, the new interventions that you're looking at. And I suppose that's what my job's been, well, for at least the last couple of decades, is to look at what interventions we can design to give to schools to improve the lot of children and young people. Okay, and that's the end point. Yes, teachers probably need a bit of education in between. Yes, we need to know a little bit more about the impact of that and the measurement of that. But actually, it's about improving the lives of children and young people. Slick, those two first presentations, and very well orchestrated and linear. Mine's probably just going to go all over the place. Okay, so it'll be a little bit different, and more of a smorgasbord approach. We'll be drawing on quite a lot of projects, because I think where Sam and Alan are now, I was probably in that space 20 years ago here, looking at multi-skills academies, and I established the first movement-based approach to physical education, I think, in the UK. 20 years ago, the multi-skills academies came here, and I was responsible for that national rollout. And then I did a rollout of talent in physical education and looked at how we can model talent within physical education, very different from sport. And I suppose as I went through that journey, I realised that it's fine modelling and it's fine theorising, but we need to get closer to the ground, in the trenches, and make sure that what we design actually has some form of impact and works. So this presentation really is I suppose, we did one study with Kev and a few others in 2015. It's sad, it was the largest study of its kind to look at movement competence of children in the UK. And Alan's done a systematic review of slightly older children, but with the younger children's age group, there's very little of this work going on, and certainly not very few longitudinal studies. And a great question, it's cross-sectional appreciation of what's going on. But what happens over time? And does showing the children the data motivate them, or does it demotivate them? Do certain children get demotivated by looking at that data? So we have a bit of a shortfall in tracking children through. And Kev and I are kind of working on the launch of a new centre for better child and youth sport. I think that's one of the aims, is to look at children more longitudinally. We believe that really they just don't move as well anymore. And we haven't got data going back to the 50s and 60s. We could probably draw on some data, but certainly over the last couple of decades, there's certainly no improvement. There's a regression in children. And Alan's already showed you, and Sam's already showed you. That's the problem. So how do we stem it? What do we do differently? Particularly in a post-COVID world, where that's progressed even further. It's not just my work. There's people all over the world that have been involved in the development of what I'm about to show you. So I certainly can't take all of the plaudits for this. I've led quite a lot of the work, but there's such a strong cast of people that have been involved at various levels. So I'd just firstly like to thank them. I'd like to thank the eSports Trust and Made to Play as well, which is Nike's social and community arm, because they funded all the work for the past 20 years. Most of the funding for this has come through them. I'm going to set it up a little bit. I'm just going to try and intrude a little bit into your minds about how we work through problems. And another term for problem, a synonym, is a dilemma. And we often go at dilemmas, I do, because I'm a pragmatic type of guy. I don't like fluffing about, I don't like grey really. I like looking at something and saying, that's the solution. And I'll go and check, and I'll test, and Kev will say, well, Dave, there might be a different way of looking at that. And I'll listen, but actually, I do see things in very black and white ways. An example of this is, do we do physical literacy or not? Now, we presented this at the International Physical Literacy Conference a couple of weeks ago, so I use that example, but it's an interesting one. Do we do it or don't we? Do we do movement competence or don't we? And it's an interesting one. It starts the conversation. But it's only a start of the conversation, really. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do now is, in your mind, start thinking about, well, what is the gap, all that stuff in between. Sam's talked about context and policy actors as being key drivers in some of that decision making. I'm going to use a little bit of I used this when I was in Australia, I used it with coaches and getting them to think about coach-athlete relationship. And when you do it as a teacher with children, what is this space in between? Who inhabits that? Who controls that? Who's driving some of those key decisions? And Mark is described as this empty space, a gap between one thing and another, or a pause within a movement or flow. It describes the essence of the energy or intention that is felt or experienced in that space. So it's like there's something in here we need to explore a little bit. It's not yes, it's not no, it's somewhere in between. For instance, the silence between the notes, that's very ethereal, isn't it? Very arty. The silence between the notes makes the music as much as the actual notes. So if we use this concept of man, develop that a little bit, to another analogy or a metaphor, which about a fire. What makes a fire burn is the space between the logs. Okay, too many logs in there, too many ideas, it's not going to breathe. So it's the space that makes it. It's the understanding what's happening between that makes that. In terms of physical literacy, now I don't know how many people in the room are aware of what's the movement of physical literacy at the moment, and that's not fun. But there is a movement going on. I've just finished a year's work developing the UK consensus statement for physical literacy. So you'll see the launch of that. It was supposed to be a couple of months ago, but probably in September. This multi-dimensional, and Alan's already in the space, way ahead of his game, because that's where we're going. That's where we're going. I wrote a paper in 2005 with Richard Bailey, which pretty much had exactly the same on it. It's not new, it's packaged differently, and it's called something different, but really it's saying that children, and the way we develop children, has to be multi-dimensional. We can't stay in the physical. But I'll be honest with you, I've been in that space. I've been in a space which says to coaches and teachers, we need to look at the holistic development of a child. Did you know what suffers as a result? The physical. We get teachers to think too much about these peripheral aspects. So Alan's going to move on to now how do we educate teachers around the importance, and it's a good answer. How do we educate them? I think we've got to get the physical right. Physical education. So in my mind, it's a personal opinion, and the physical literacy guys don't particularly like it. But who cares? I'm there to disrupt. I'm senior enough to kind of ask a few questions. We've got, well, what is the physical? What are we doing physically? Because if it's about technical and tactical development, and we exhibit that through a physical dimension, that's maybe not right. And you ask Alan the question, and for him it's a staggering thing, is that flat line of movement competence. I'll tell you why. It's because national curriculum, Key Stage 3, it has very little mention of movement development. You can go back to his slide and have a look. It doesn't. It's about technical and tactical development. That's why we move away from it, because the policy doesn't enable us to stay in the space. So really it's about, physical is movement, in my mind. It's about movement competence, movement cultures. It's about providing opportunities for children to thrive and flourish through movement. And analysing, assessing, measuring, feeding back to the child about their movement development. Okay? I have changed, and I've listened to Kev a little bit. I think I have a broader perspective, but I'll come back to that at the end. There is physical activity in there, and there's physical fitness as well. So a couple of years ago, probably before I started working with Kev, I probably wouldn't have put them, but I just thought it's all about movement. But I do understand there's a broader appreciation of that, what it needs to look like. You already know that. I'm interested, for the purpose of this presentation, about motor skills, okay, movement, and how we develop movement, whether that's appropriate. So if we've got dilemmas then, so let's set some of these up. What goes through your mind? How do we support the transition of children from learning basic movement skills, we might call them foundation movement skills or fundamental movement skills, to meaningful participation in games and physical activity? If we have a national curriculum at Key Stage 2, or we've got in your school, we've got a focus on movement in those early years of development, then how do we take that on to those older children and develop those children effectively? So in movement terms, that's the development of movement. We're looking at these reflective skills. I think I'm preaching to the converted here. Skills that for survival, skills for inclusion. If I can't catch, throw, etc., I can't participate in a lot of games anyway, and I certainly won't be able to access the social circles I want to for my social interaction and become a member of society. It's as severe as that. I'm not overplaying that. It's as severe as that. But this is where I'm at with this project I'm about to show you. When we've done this, what happens next? In sport play skills. I want to say that's like skills that we use in sport. I'm going to separate them into stability, object control, locomotion. I think you know enough about the different aspects of that. And I'm going to ask a question around, well, how do we track the children then from how they demonstrate emerging perspectives of those to becoming proficient? We can pick that scale to pieces if we want. And I kind of say, well, the terms might not be exactly right, but from a practitioner point of view, they've been very well received, so I'll keep using them. Okay? So the first glimpse of this project that I keep talking about in riddles is something that we developed for Nike and their Made to Play initiative. And this is a project called the Movement for Sport Play Kit. It's their interpretation of something we've developed here called Movement-Oriented Games-Based Assessment, or what we affectionately call as MOGBA. Movement-Oriented Games-Based Assessment. Okay? Our ownership of the project it's ours, that's MOGBA. Nike's interpretation, they've called it the Movement for Sport Play Kit. And I'll show you a little bit, if this works, which I'm hoping it does, about what it looks like.
Don't let our cute smiles fool you. We take play pretty seriously. But not all of us get the same opportunities to stay active, especially girls. With Made to Play, Nike is committed to getting all kids moving. But they can't do it alone. That's where you come in. Our future is a team sport, and we need all the players we can get. If you're willing, we're ready to show the world exactly what we're made to do. We were made for this. Are you?
Nike came to us and said, Dave, love your work. We've just finished a project called Start to Move, which is an early years project which affected 500,000 teachers, 500,000 children. There's that many teachers in the UK. 500,000 children in the UK. So we love your work. We were presenting it in the States at the time, all their representatives were there. What can you do for the next age group, 8 to 12? We want it to be about assessment, but we don't want it to be about just assessment. We want it to be about development. We've got tens of thousands of coaches scattered across the world, involved in a range of projects for using sport for development and engagement and empowerment, particularly within the girls' space. Across the world, like that, 27 million children involved in their projects. So I'd gone from a project involving 500,000 children, which I thought actually was pretty good. You know, if you think of the impact you can have in your career around children, as next head of PE and teacher, I was thinking I've done all right with that. And then someone says, you can have 500,000, Dave. That's stepping up. But this is Premier League. It doesn't get any bigger. 27 million children. Talk about the pressure. And like, I don't know, something like 40,000 coaches we were going to affect as well. So what we did, and when I say we, a whole team of people, we set up the Movement for Sport Play Kit. And it's got 4 key components to it. If you want access to the Play Kit, I can give you it now. Thank goodness it's being launched. You have to sign a little NDA thing because there's no one about selling it. But if you want this, take my details down there and I can send you it. And some people have had access. Gavin's been on the next project which follows this, and he's already got it and has been using it in his school. So there's these 4 components to it. The first component is about delivering the actual activities. And these 14 activities, it's dead simple, because from all my years in this space, keep it simple. Keep it really simple. Yeah, don't complicate things. Make sure that people understand the activities, understand what the focus is within that, And then if you ask them to assess something, keep it dead simple. You're looking at the legs and the body. Because every time we went and trialled it across various parts of the world, too complex, too complex, too complex. Too many things, too many kids, an hour. So we've got to keep that really in focus there. And use games that don't have any affiliation to like any national sport. It's not football, it's not netball, it's not athletics. It's got flavours of that, but it's none of that. It's to try and come away from some of that. So one example that we've used is a game called Tea Time. That's like a phase 1 game. We've got 3 phases of development within the project, within the resource. First phase, quite simple activities. Remember, they've come from fundamental movement skills, and we're now asking them to put them into complex, refined movement patterns. So if we go straight into end zone 2 and get them to chuck a ball about and use invasion and peripheral awareness and visual acuity, my God, we already know the kids are coming at the age of 8 and 9. They don't have those. We've seen it. Go to do the videoing in schools when we first started doing the videoing for the resource. Couldn't do it. We went into schools with 10-year-olds and we couldn't do it. We couldn't perform an activity effectively enough to demonstrate what that looked like. So we use these phases and we concentrate that stability as a movement focus throughout. That's the card in a little bit more detail. And this is the children actually playing it. So on the card, that little QR code takes you to this bit of video. Nothing particularly mind-blowing about that. You'll have seen a T-test before, probably. I saw a T-test being performed about 5 years ago when we were developing the resource. I thought, I'll nick that. It's quite a good activity. We go from tea time, which is a very individual thing, to quite a big team thing. Was out at Hare Hills Primary doing some observations of when we've delivered this to 20 schools last year. And it's like a whole game of tea time going on. There's patterns of movement, they're interacting across a playground. Within the movement, it's a starting point for something a bit bigger, but it's a good starting point. And we developed that on the back of the simplicity of it as well. So a little bit about what you need, a little bit about how you access this little 15-second video, 30-second video, how to play it differently, and a few other things going on in there. We then, after we'd set it all up and we'd done some feasibility trials, we needed, Andy, your point, about measuring it, okay? Measure. How do we know it's working? Well, I've done all types of studies around feasibility, and I continue to do feasibility studies. But you need a randomised control trial. You need local school doing it, and you need another school not doing it, and you need to measure the difference. It's the only way you can do it. I've been in the game for years and not got to this, and every time someone questions it, I say, yeah, I don't have the answer. It's happening in that school, but I don't know whether that's normal or not. So the only way you can do it is a randomised control trial, and this was a global one. Global up until the point of COVID, and then it became very non-global. Like the state pulled out because they couldn't get back into schools. Liverpool started 8 weeks into a 9-week intervention, couldn't continue. Australia, Newcastle in Australia, 8 weeks in, lockdown, what lockdown was like in Australia, can't do it anymore. So the first time we've actually managed to do it is in mighty Leeds. Leeds have done it, we've finished the site for Leeds. We've got 500 kids who've worked through the project, and we're looking at the comparisons. We've already done the project, we're just looking at the data that's going to map between, and hopefully we'll have that published fairly soon. The next dilemma then, how do you assess it? MOGPA, Movement for Sport Play Kit, delivers some activities, and then how do you assess within those authentically? Alan's mentioned Dragon Challenge, okay, which for me is the most authentic movement competence assessment framework ever designed. We used it on the RCT, the global RCT. If you want to look at movement competence, for me, Dragon Challenge is where it's at. There's an athletic skills track out there. There's loads of others, but in terms of authenticity, ecological validity, something that the kids are probably used to doing, and you don't just stand there and get them to do this or whatever. That's not authentic. When do they do that? I think it's the closest. So we've got that, but I think what Mogba does, it moves it even closer to authenticity. Because in Tom's work, and Tom couldn't make it today unfortunately, because this would have been different now. In Tom's work, he asked a group of experts what was really needed in terms of children's assessment, and a published paper a couple of years ago about that. And what we found is, if you're going to do it for research purposes, engineer it. And Dragon's Challenge is good, but it's still engineered. It's not authentic. These kids aren't just playing, they're doing the test. And all the complications around them doing the test. For educational purposes, look at the term the experts created. It's not me, it was like international experts. It's got to be natural. If you want to assess a child's movement competence, and you engineer that in any way, you're losing ecological validity. I.e., that's not what the kid normally does. That's not authentic. You've got to get as close as you can to that. So what we do is we say, right, you're going to do tea time, and as they're doing tea time, you're going to assess movement within it. And the assessment for this is, you know when they did the tea time, and they went up to the top of the seat, moved across, lunged, we're assessing the lunge. And that's a stability assessment. It's their ability to move dynamically into and out of movement. Okay? And then we move away to the other side. Do the kids know it? We might tell them. We might tell them the score. Who knows? Pedagogically, there's a whole range of features of that assessment now. But ultimately, we're not actually standing them there and doing the test, we're doing it within the activity. It presents some issues. Because when you go to some of the more complex activities, there's another one we play, which is square ball, which is a game we play on the floor, and we dribble in and we try to score in 4 different benches. Okay? Now the movement focus is this. It's a reverse dribbling away. And it's object control. It's how well they control the ball within that movement. That's not going to happen a lot. So we might have to introduce some elements of engineering into the game in a constraints type of way, or an affordances type of way, to actually allow them to exhibit the movement. You see what I'm saying? The more complex you go, the more complex the assessment, there is a reduction in authenticity sometimes, because you've got to engineer the game to see it. Again, I've just explained that, so I won't show you, but again, videos on exactly what the assessment looks like within that, and a little bit of typical criteria that we're asking the children to fulfill within it, going from emerging to proficient. And notice, 4 and 5, basically, can I do it with control and fluency? Can I do it with speed and accuracy? So that reverse dribble might be a bit clunky. They're actually all right to there, and then it's their ability to stabilise is affecting their ability to execute the actual activity. So we may need to think about how that all works in practice. We've done some feasibility of it. We went and asked coaches that were delivering it in the States what they thought about the resource. Before quite a lot of subsequent development, but we've got a sense it's fantastic, it's based on stages of development, gives you areas of criteria. These are coaches on the Made to Play initiative in the States and in Spain. Just giving them this and what we want you to do, what we want you to strive for, you know, if there are limitations and they're not here, well, let's try and get them into a particular improvement way of thinking. Motivation, confidence, part of physical literacy. So that ability to kind of understand where we're at and how we're going to get there. And actually, as an individual, have some ownership of that. We do a bit more, it's almost a more in-depth assessment. We provide some materials for that. So if you've been using the Moving for Sport Play Kit for a while and you want to take the children into a new, or you've got more able children that are able, or you're in a different environment. You might be in an athletics development environment, after school type of club development. There is more of a detailed perspective on the assessment that you might want to use. And so we give a little bit more, rather than just concentrating on 2 parts, we might go for the full package, if you like. So again, Sam mentioned context. in one context, in a PE class with 30 kids for an hour, with a piano in one corner and crumbs still on the floor from lunchtime, you may not be able to do all of that. But in other environments, you might. Again, this is designed for coaches and teachers, so that ability to do that is really important. How do we support you, practitioners, in adapting sessions to meet the needs of all those children? So we provide a little bit about how we change the challenge, play it differently within the cards. Yeah? So if square ball is stagnating, you're looking at that and you're thinking, kids are starting to lose a bit of focus here, we give you ways of shape-shifting the activity to try and respond to the needs of the kids. We also have this other differentiation thing, where you can actually use a movement-based approach to differentiating the activity. You might have heard of this before. If I say to you differentiation, tell me a model that you can use to differentiate your activity, what would you say? Some classics out there.
Step.
Thank you, Sergio. Step, space, task, equipment, people. Most people would know that, yeah? This isn't that. This is something called SERV, which is space, effort, and relationships. If you want to develop children's movement and change the activity, we're not using step all the way through. It will take us so far, but it won't take us into the spaces that they need to go into. Space is one of them. So what space are you affording them to achieve the movement outcome? What effort are you asking of them to perform that movement? What relationship are you asking them to have to be able to achieve the movement outcome? If you're doing tea time, and I introduce an activity where I've got to do it in synchronicity with another person, that's an added layer of complexity. That's a relationship now I'm going to form with this person. That's the next step from doing it by themselves. Yes, it's a different way of looking at it, and there's a whole resource within there to give you some ideas around space, effort, relationships, and that as a differentiation within the resource. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to let's run through some of these examples as well. I want to get on to this, because I think this is the bit now. This is, for me, we've done more of the movements for sport playing. We continue to get grants to digitise the resource. You're going to get this quite clunky PDF document, okay? It's exactly what it says on the tip. It is clunky. If you printed it out, it's like you've killed about 5 trees. Just getting it, and you carry it around, and it just doesn't work. It's impossible. So I've worked in digitised formats before. We're digitising the tool with a global marketing company who's going to look at that and get that out. So that's the next phase of that. But this is exciting for me, because this is where we actually look at movement competence alongside physical fitness. And what Alan was saying there is like almost quadrants of development. Well, how do you do both? So coming soon. It's a school near you. Well, coming soon, actually, with Gavin sat in the audience. It's a false style ever, is that? Because we've already done it. We've already tried it. So Gavin and 12 other schools around Leeds came in. Is it really a year ago? God almighty, it's a year ago. So a year ago, came in and said, got that dilemma, can you help us solve it, please? Yeah? How do we do that? We want both. We want to bridge across, but we're going to start in secondary schools. So early experiences within your secondary school curriculum. I don't know, Gavin's already discussed some of this, so I won't go into too much detail about it. But we combine then Rampage, which is a lot of the work that Kevin Collins has done, which is basically a session plan, a session outline, involving the use of various physical fitness traits with what I've just shown you. Okay? And we're calling that, very funky, move to sport. Because basically it's that bridge from movement to sport. Yeah? Designed specifically for the transition between childhood and adolescence. So that range of 7 to 12. Roughly, for some children, but not others, quite clearly. And that's what we're looking at the moment, is how Move to Sport is working. And Gavin and a range of teachers co-created that with us. We piloted it in schools last summer term. We evaluated it at the time and writing it up as we speak. In terms of how did we co-create it, and is it feasible? And that should be, the results of that should be coming through. I'd love to show results now, but we're not quite finished in figuring out where they look. But that's what to look out for next, is move to sport. So I can send you the MOGBA details. Obviously, you get access to the presentation for the references to Rampage as well, so you can get glimpses of what that's going to look like. And just keep looking for that move to sport resource as it develops. And do you know what? We're always keen on people helping us. Gavin came and helped and did a great job of helping us go create that. So if you can, help us out. If I send you a MOGBA and you use it and you say, oh, Dave's struggling with this, struggling with that, it's great feedback as well. Bit of a whistle-stop tour, that one. Bit of a roller coaster. Hope it's helped. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dave. Great overview. Time for probably one question, because it looks like the other room has just finished and we're all back in here. Who's going to get that important question today?
If hand goes up first, you get the house point.
Just a question. It's not a question really. It's more like an opinion from the three of you, or anyone really. An opinion on strengths-led approach and ecological approaches. So the idea of being non-linear and exploration, self-organization.
Yeah.
I think we touched on maybe slightly during your presentation. So could it be, that providing that variety of movements and solutions and exposing the kids to problems that they need to solve through the constraints? Would that be a solution to sort of solve that problem that we are, in that first presentation, from year 5 to year 9, the flat line? So does it mean they're exposed almost to the same drills? We're doing more variability during our sessions. And it could also inform the curriculum, not just on the field, but also in the classroom. So not maybe as a policy, but more as an approach of the old school. So yeah, an opinion on ecological approach.
It's so interesting that I was in the office next to Keith Davids, who was the big proponent of dynamic systems theory, ecological frameworks. We're both barking up the same tree. We're probably just slightly further around the tree in certain positions, barking slightly differently. I think the general thing, the consensus is the ideology needs to be every child is different. So as soon as you do something the same for every child, you're going to miss children. You're going to miss children's development within that. So Alan's question was, are we doing things that are appropriate? And Sam will drive down there as well, because actually, what is the role of policy in enactment and in a transformative curriculum? How is that working? Ideology plays a huge part. At the schools that I work with, you need a Gavin. Gavin's embedded it now in year 7. Next year, fantastic. Already embedded early experiences of MOGBA. That's an ideology that's coming to fruition though. That's someone who gets the fact that you're going to have to do things differently to redress some of the key issues we've got. You can't keep doing what we're doing. If we keep doing what we're doing, the regression's just going to keep happening and happening and happening. We can't keep doing what we've done. We have to look at new ways of approaching children's development to take them into spaces to improve their movement competence, physical activity, physical fitness, perceived self-competence, motivation and competence. Can't keep doing the same, because it's got us nowhere. And that's not, I'm talking to myself as well here. We've done things in certain ways that haven't worked. All the evidence suggests it's doing nothing to stop the regression of children. And I think, from your point, one of the key issues we've got is a very narrow curriculum, very technically and tactically constructed. We don't look after children's movement as they come into some of these environments, and we lose them. And that's, I wouldn't mind leaving you with that, something to think about over a weekend. Sat in your back gardens, having your barbecues and drinking a few cocktails, no doubt. Thanks again for your time.